You're listening to the Himal Southasian podcast, Partitions of the Heart, Conversations with Mander. This is Season 1, Muslim Life and Death in Modi's India. Follow the Himal Southasian podcast channel on your podcast app to find all the episodes as they are released. You'll find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, where you can share, rate, and review us. Visit our website himalmag.com and support our work by becoming a Himal patron today. Follow us to follow the conversation.
Salam, Namaste, Zindabad friends. I'm Mander for one more episode of talking about the crisis of India's Muslims as part of my larger podcast series, Partitions of the Heart. I'm doing this with Himal, South Asia. Himal is an extraordinary publication that for 35 years has been looking at South Asia beyond the borders that the turbulent politics of our subcontinent have drawn. Today, I'm delighted to have a conversation with Dr. Amirullah Khan. In the larger public space, Amir is one of the finest development economists who also focus specifically on the deprivation of India's Muslims. He's a professor in the Indian School of Business and all over the place. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, Amir, the Sachar Committee was an important moment, one of the most statesmanlike gestures taken by the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to set up this committee. And I think the context for me was in the entire movement of the Babri Masjid, a word that Mr. Lal Krishna Advani kept using was appeasement.
Appeasement, yes.
The message to the people of India was that earlier governments have done too much for India's Muslims. They've treated them as a vote bank, and they've neglected India's Hindu majority and instead placed all or much of India's resources for India's Muslims. That's where the word appeasement came. And I think in his very quiet but very scholarly kind of way, Dr. Manmohan Singh wanted the facts to be placed before the nation. And when the report came out, what became very clear was that India's Muslims suffered relatively similar development deficits to the two most acknowledged disadvantaged communities, which is India's Dalits and India's Adivasis. That was, I think many of us knew it, but that factual reality came out. Prime Minister Modi again repeatedly using the word appeasement in his last election speech before the last elections. In fact, on the ramparts of the Red Fort, he talked about three evils, and one of them was appeasement, which literally, I think if you unpack his understanding of appeasement, any affirmative action, policy action in favor of India's Muslims is something that they are opposed to. Now, I want to step back and I just want to listen to you. What has happened to India's Muslims in these 75 years? Why have they reached the bottom of India's development trajectory?
So let me start off by quoting an economist that the Prime Minister admires. Surjit Bhalla did a fabulous analysis on the socio-religious groupings. And Surjit points out that the average Muslim, the median Muslim post-independence was where the Hindu OBC is today. So there was the Hindu upper caste, there's the Christian, the Jain, and there was the OBC.
And then you have the Dalits and the Adivasis.
And the Dalits and
but the OBCs today are pretty strong.
So we are talking of 1951.
Okay.
And so Surjit points out that if you look at monthly per capita consumption, which is the indicator we all use because that's the data we have, you will find that the Muslim occupies that middle run.
Occupied.
Yeah, in the 1950s.
Okay.
Then Surjit shows that post the 1990s, the trend starts going southwards. And first,
is it really the 1990s? Was it?
So
wasn't it much earlier?
So what happens is that it is the 81 census and the 81 figures and the 81 NSS rounds that show a decline, a relative decline in the Muslim per capita incomes, in expenditures, and therefore you find that the Muslim goes below OBC, goes below BCs, goes below SCs, and today is poised at that level where the Muslim is marginally above the ST.
Yeah. Okay. Which is really, and which is below the Dalit and marginally. So
and trending downwards.
But I mean, before you continue, I still want to interrogate.
Yes.
Didn't this decline begin right from after Nehru passed away?
I'm just hazarding a hypothesis that maybe this decline, if we go back in time and nobody's done this work, and look at the data from 1870 onwards, which is when we have the census data, I think the decline would begin there.
Yeah, my guess, I mean, intuitively, I guess that is what happened.
But we haven't done any work. Surjit and a few others have done this work post-independence, and it's clear that after about 30 or 40 years, the Muslim decline
became
is
very
precipitous.
Yeah.
Now, how does one explain this? The sociologists who study migration, their argument is that the elite Muslim and the middle class Muslim migrate 1947. So, and so did the Muslim industry. The Muslim industry that moved from Calcutta to Dhaka, that moved from Amritsar to Lahore, which were the industrial hubs, went away from Calcutta. So this.
But is that true? I mean, just for East Pakistan, what I hear is that it was the Hindu who was the big landlord in East Pakistan and Bangladesh, and it was largely Dalit OBC Muslims who were the working class.
Yeah. But the big industry, the big elite that moved away to Pakistan, the Muslim elite that moved. So there wasn't that anchor completely was missing in that is one explanation that is given. This is the historical sociological explanation. There is very little in the economics textbooks on this issue, but certainly what happened was that the Muslim population migrated in large numbers. The elite Muslim population migrated, and the poor stayed back in most areas except in South India, where the migration was very little. So also what happens was the nature of industrialization, and the nature of employment. So increasingly employment and this trend gets exaggerated faster after the 1990 reforms, when jobs became available to those who were skilled and who had a university degree. You will find that the Muslim dropout rates even today after higher secondary are far more precipitous than the non-Muslim.
Yeah, we'll talk about
that. We'll get to the education, but
but skills. Yeah, I mean, in my understanding, Muslims have concentrated a lot on skill building.
The traditional skill building.
Artisans.
And the artisan cluster, the artisan economy of India started suffering 50 years ago. Yeah. So that was the other.
I think the decline of the artisan sector must be seen as an important contributory factor.
That's where in most of the artisan sectors you have more Muslim domination, and that sector not only collapsed in terms of domestic consumption with cheaper imports coming in from China and whatever, but it also suffered, and that's the serious issue, that it was a major export earner for India.
Okay.
And exports came down significantly. Now the exports are close to zero. So,
and I would say that globalization must have precipitated the death knell, in a sense, of the artisan sector.
Also, our trade policy, which encouraged imports at the expense of exports.
Only post 1990.
Yeah, so therefore the export sector, especially the small and medium export sector, continues to decline even today, and
Right.
that's why the rupee stands at 88 rupees to a dollar.
Mm.
So that was one aspect of it. So the second aspect is the mobility aspect, and that is something that some demographers have started pointing out.
Social mobility, are you talking
Now
about?
I'm talking of physical migration,
Okay,
mobility,
physical
right?
mobility.
Uh, and this is the strange thing that one sees that's
I
happening.
think Muslims, working class is very mobile.
And the data says exactly the opposite.
Really? Yeah.
That the if you divide the socio-religious communities by way of their numbers that migrate, then you will find that the rate of migration to from rural to urban and from tier 3 to 2 and 2 to 1 is increasingly becoming the slowest as far as Muslims are concerned. The Muslim migration,
But how recent is that?
this is till 2011, till which we have data.
From
And
between the 1990s and 2011, or
between
even
the 1971 and 2011, you find that the rate of firstly the rate of urban migration itself comes down,
Mhm.
and within that the rate of urban migration among Muslims is the slowest. And
But
there is enough indication to show, sir,
yeah,
that 2011 onwards it's even more precipitous.
but isn't that? I mean, I would hazard a guess that that indicates a sense of fear.
Now, firstly, why do Indians not migrate?
Yeah.
When we look at and try and get that data out from the census and whatever, then we find that very few Indians migrate. And within that, the number of Muslims migrating is even slower.
So internal migration, we're talking.
We are talking only of internal
Yeah,
migration.
the other migration is, of course, another story altogether.
Is another story. So,
Yeah.
firstly, sir, that the mobility,
Mm.
the Muslim population prior to 1947
Mm.
was a very vibrant urban population.
Okay.
Even now, the Muslim is
I
40%.
was
40%.
sorry to interrupt you. I was really startled to learn that Muslims were 33% of Delhi's population.
That's right.
And in 2 or 3 years, they came down to 5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even otherwise, while 30% of India is urban, 40% of India's Muslim is urban.
Yeah.
So Muslims are urban for historical factors, but that rate of urbanization has been coming down, which means that a group of people who are living in villages
Mhm.
without any asset, the villager in India does well only when she has some land.
Yeah.
But the Muslim in India does not have
Doesn't have
land.
land. Yeah.
And here is this Muslim
So
now.
then, in rural area, I mean, am I overgeneralizing where they're largely either artisans or farm labor? Is that a correct generalization?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that is the most marginalized
And those are
section.
that almost by definition means poverty.
Means poverty.
Mm.
So that is the other thing that happened. And post the 1990s, because of that huge differential in educational levels,
Right.
and the jobs only coming into a service sector, into a financial sector that required higher education, the Muslims just dropped out of employment. And therefore, you will find that if you look at the Muslim workforce,
Right.
2/3 of that is self-employed. In India, self-employed is poor.
So, I mean, this I think goes beyond a hypothesis, is that this very high level of self-employment among India's Muslims is also as the result of the expectation of discrimination when they seek jobs. And let me say it and then you tell me whether your data is that it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no point going into higher education because I'm not going to get a job. I'll face discrimination. So let me get out and employ myself. Is that an overgeneralization? Does your data support?
So two questions. One is there discrimination? Is there a expectation of being discriminated, or is it purely deprivation?
Yeah.
So therefore, we did this one study looking at the periodic labor force data, which gives you wages for at every 3-month frequency for all the workers, and we just focused on pre and post COVID, and the data is so outstanding and so evocative, so stark, so articulate, that if you see urban India, then it is so obvious that the maximum decline in wages between 2019 and 22, pre-COVID and post-COVID, is purely in the Muslim workforce. The wages, which is out there, which is just the numbers.
Yeah.
So if people have found their wages slashed, it has been Muslim. In rural areas, it has been women who suffered the most. Their wages declined very fast.
Generally, across communities.
Across the so, and it's very fascinating. What this suggests is that the Indian Muslim does not face as much discrimination in rural India as much as she faces in urban India.
So, Amir, I'm persuaded, but only partially by your explanation.
Yes.
Let me, somebody who has a wonderful mind and who I respect a lot is Dr. Upendra Bakshi.
Of course.
Yes. Now, Upendra Bakshi, one of the things he says is that we shouldn't describe people as poor.
Yeah.
We should always call them impoverished, because poverty is not how you happen to be.
Yes, and it's not a choice. Yes.
Impoverished underlines this is something that is done to you.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, don't you see a central role of the state in impoverishing India's Muslims? And let me give you just one illustration. Is Mewat.
Yeah.
Mewat is such a, the new district, it's such a dramatic example, because it is just next to Gurugram, which has all the
Fortune 500.
Every single one of them is there. This glittering sort of hub of, we could be like Amartya Sen had said, islands of California.
Yes.
So there it is. And just next to it, he said, in a sea of sub-Saharan Africa, you just have to go sort of 30 kilometers and there you are. Nu was identified as the most economically backward district in the country. 80% Muslim population, one of the highest outside Kashmir. And I have seen, I've got engaged with them because the high levels of lynching that have happened over the last years. But I've got more and more fascinated by the degree of deprivation that I see there from the state. I'll give you one more example. Again, coming from the work that I do, is Northeast Delhi. Northeast Delhi, the district where the violence happened, is the largest district in Delhi, with the largest working class population, and we found it amazingly deprived of public services. So what I found missing in your entire explanation of this backwardness is conscious, wanton state deprivation of public services in Muslim-dominated areas. Is that a story that your data upholds?
So that's the headline. When you look at the Planning Commission's backward districts or the Niti Aayog's aspirational districts, they are all Muslim districts.
Yeah.
And the Sachar Committee
and it
out.
It's not how they happen to be.
When you look at the Sachar Committee pointed that out. That if you see the bottom decile, the last 70 districts, they're usually, except for the tribal ones, they're usually districts where Muslims abound. And in bureaucracy, we've seen how the choice, the location of schools, the location of hospitals, the location of wells. Even in that million well scheme, the wells were dug where there were non-Muslim populations. So that
non-Muslim and non-Dalit
and non-Dalits and 100% non. And you see that everywhere. Take a state like Telangana. You see that the most deprived districts would be the districts where there is some Muslim population. UP, Bihar.
Absolutely.
That's so. So in terms of the state, almost everything. And in fact, if you even see the delimitation exercises, they have also led to a disempowerment of the Muslim population. Assam is a classic case. Where there is some 35-37% Muslim population and cannot get elected. So it's been the state attempt and the state's very successful way in which it has been able to marginalize geographical areas that are Muslim dominated and Adivasi dominated is so very clear.
Across political parties. I
Oh,
mean, this is
everybody.
not something just that the BJP has done.
The data that also one has to look at is in public employment. So 93% of India's works in the informal sector. It's only 7% who
Yeah.
have contracts, of which roughly half, slightly more than half, are in public employment, state
Okay.
employment.
Still.
Still, so about 40 million
But I'm sure it's
people.
declining, that
That
proportion.
is, it's static right now, but it is going to get worse. So about 40 million people, 19 million in private sector, 21 in
Right,
government
right.
sector. In that, look at Muslim representation. Even in the states which are secular, in states which have non-BJP parties, even
Right.
where the states have been pretty progressive,
Right.
you will not find a single occupation where you will have more than 2 or 3%. My standard example is the Osmania University in Hyderabad. The Osmania University was set up as an Urdu medium university exactly 100 years ago. 1946, it had about 50% faculty and students, Muslim and non-Muslim. Today it is 1.5%.
My
In
God.
a city where you have 30% Muslims, better off, reasonably well educated. This is Osmania. Now you can take Patna University, you can go to Bombay University and imagine what the situation is. So that is a big indicator, and that's a big indicator of this feeling of being discriminated. Whether one is being discriminated or not is still not sure.
No, I just feel that when we look at the data that Sachar Committee
Yes.
showed us, put a mirror before us, we need to recognize that this has been done to the Muslim people of our country consistently by government after government.
Yes.
And I think that needs to be central to our understanding of what has gone wrong. Would you agree?
So that is where we get out of the pure economics and look at the political economy.
It is political economy
Sir,
that we should be speaking about.
and you know it's a tragedy that the Muslim what has been the Muslim demand from the state. The Muslim demand from the state has ironically and very very sadly been issues that are not really Muslim.
Yeah.
For example, the single biggest issue post independence was Urdu. Now, Urdu is not a Muslim language.
Yeah.
Why is how is Urdu got anything to do with Muslims? 50% of Muslims in India do not speak Urdu.
Yeah.
50% of Urdu speakers are Harshmandars and so on.
Yeah.
Urdu is Indian language far more than it is Bangladeshi or Pakistani. Nobody in Pakistan speaks Urdu, nobody in Bangladesh does. But Urdu became central to Muslim aspirations. Aligarh University became central to Muslim aspirations. And Kashmir became, none of these three are Muslim issues. One is a purely education issue, one is a purely geographical territorial issue, and one is a language issue. The Muslim aspiration did not go to a fourth, and therefore the demand, and this has been the secular party's justification, saying that look, we got a vote when we said here is 30 crore rupees for a Urdu festival, but we didn't get voted because there was a hospital that we set up in a Muslim area. So that comes to the issue of
the Muslim leadership, I think.
So that comes to the issue of the Muslim leadership. And one constant question that this professor of mine used to ask was, name a Muslim leader in India who is not Maulana Azad. And post independence, name a Muslim leader. And we would all be scratching our heads. Who can you talk of one person who has been a Muslim leader? That brings us
Zakir Hussain, I suppose.
So Zakir Hussain was so, firstly, we are talking of post 47. Zakir Hussain was primarily pre 47, and he lived a few years. But otherwise, you will have to think that hard and get that there is no other name that you can think of. And secondly, the issue that
but again, have they not emerged? Have they not been allowed to emerge by the political spectrum?
So two issues there, and that's the core question.
Yeah. Why are you not a leader of?
So that brilliant. Sir. So the question is that who did the Muslim want as her leader? And survey upon survey has shown that for the Muslim, the Indian Muslim, it was never important to have a Muslim leader. It was far more. The Indian Muslim had far greater conviction and belief in a Nehru than it could ever have on a Jinnah or anybody else.
Yeah.
Mulayam Singh was the leader.
Yeah.
Lalu Prasad was a Muslim leader. These are the people and who became called Maulana and whatever.
Yeah.
But these were people. The Muslim voter really voted for a leader who would protect the idea of India, not a Muslim vote bank or a Hindu vote bank. And it continues. You see the Indian Muslim League, except for the two constituencies in Kerala where it has no constituency anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
And that I can say for any Muslim party that is localized in one constituency or two. Hyderabad is a great example.
Owaisi again, yes.
So where is the Muslim leadership? It did not emerge. So therefore, maybe an unkind thing that maybe it was this leadership that the Muslim trusted, which did not reciprocate that.
Yeah.
Maybe the Muslims voted left everywhere.
Yeah.
Hyderabad, the MLA used to be a CPM MLA, Warangal, but did the left abandon the Muslim? Don't know. But West Bengal's indicators are horrible. And that's why you find, sir, that the Muslim voter today is a very confused voter.
Yes.
Who does she vote for? The only thing that a Muslim voter is sure of is that I will not vote the BJP.
Yeah.
But otherwise, should we vote for the Samajwadi or is the Congress better?
Yeah.
Should it be the CPM or is the Trinamool better? So
Delhi was the most
Delhi, AAP or Congress. Yeah.
And AAP has let them down so badly. And yet they have voted en masse for AAP.
They still 6 of those Muslim constituencies voted for AAP.
Yeah.
But I would just like to add that as Indians we don't care for equities. The inequality is so stark. You've spoken about it. Nobody even mentions it.
I think the political economy of Muslim economic deprivation, I think we've sort of unpacked it pretty strongly. But
except for one thing that I did not mention, and that is again Surjit's argument, where he says that the post-Mandal era was certainly an era where the backward caste got empowered. But that is where the Muslim loses out even more. Because the SC Muslim has no reservation. There are no STs among Muslims. Those 2 or 3 tribes that are there, they do get reservations, and therefore you find a couple of officers from Kashmir coming in.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
the one Gujar, but you don't find.
But that's too small. So 37,000 people or so. So SCs by law, for some strange reason, if you are Muslim, you cannot get SC.
It's not a strange reason. I think this was the one most significant betrayal that our constitution writers did. I mean, it was quite clear that they did not want Dalit Hindus to move into egalitarian faiths.
And the rest of the reservation, it just does not come the Muslim way. And while it is the most impoverished community, and if there is a reservation in Andhra 4% in Karnataka, then that's the appeasement that Mr. Modi talks about and gets a lot of votes because of that.
Right.
So this appeasement thing, it's a very strange thing that everybody is aware today that the Muslim is the most impoverished, is the poorest. But there is this appeasement, and I think that appeasement is what ironically, it is the success of a secular India that allowed Muslim places of worship to exist, that allowed people to dress the way they did, that allowed minority institutions to come up, that allowed churches to give education. And that is now being seen as, that is the appeasement that people are worried about. There is no other appeasement.
I want to talk a little bit about sectors.
Yes, sir.
Let's start with education. So both school education and higher education. Recent data, Christoph Jaffrelot pointed, which you'd be familiar with, that the only community which has ever shown since independence a decade-to-decade decline in higher education enrollment is Muslims. But also school education, once again, the stereotype is that Muslims just want to go into madrasas, but the data doesn't support that at all. But when I go to a place like Mustafabad or Mewat, I find there are hardly any public schools and government schools, and and they're so poorly resourced. So, just
Sir.
putting on your development economist hat, can you run us through what is the status, why of public education, of education among
Yes,
Muslims,
sir.
and why is it declined so badly?
So first the secular issue. The return on higher education in India is fast declining. We have the world's largest standing educated unemployed army that we have ever seen in the world, or certainly in India. 24%.
But can I interrupt you there?
Sir,
Satish Deshpande, our friend,
sir,
has pointed out quite powerfully that actually in very unequal India, the only real pathway to social mobility is through higher education.
so it's so ironical
Mm.
and such a contradiction that firstly we have the world's largest educated unemployed
Yeah.
workforce, touching nearly 40% in Haryana and
40%.
40%, 24% in the country. It's the highest ever since we started doing a PLFS in 1972.
So educated unemployed, would you say high school educated?
So this is higher secondary and university education.
Okay.
So with an undergrad degree. So the return on education, on English education, is high. The condition being that there should be a job. But if there is no job, then equally you suffer. So the return on higher education is poor and is declining, especially in the last 10 years. The return on higher education.
But I mean, that would apply also to a Dalit.
So it's a secular thing. It applies to an upper caste.
But why is the decline only with Muslims?
So the second. So that's the secular problem, that higher education. That's the reason why gross enrollment ratios in India are the worst in the world. And in Punjab, in Haryana, in Assam and Gujarat, Assam and Bihar, they will be the lowest even among sub-Saharan African countries, because there is no return on higher education. There is no job to get. Now look at the Muslim issues. That within the higher education system, the fastest increase in numbers is among the scheduled tribes.
Okay.
But why? The base is low.
Base was very, very low.
And there is a reservation. One, there is an expectation of a seat. You know that even if you get a 0% in the FITG exam, the IIT entrance exam, you will get a seat. Whereas for a similar Muslim fellow in the next house,
there is no guarantee.
You need 93% to get in, which is impossible. So there is a reservation angle there that has helped the most marginalized reach higher education and stay there. Also, education is free. So the third thing is that, and here is a very serious issue which we have been ignoring for some time, that especially over the last 10 years, the rate of inflation has been pretty steep.
Yeah.
And if you see within that, the costs of education and healthcare have grown the most. Now contrast this to stagnant wage rates. Real wage rates in India have remained either the same or declined.
Yeah.
Real wages have actually declined.
So economic growth is like this and wages are like this.
Like that.
Yeah.
So here is this gentleman who, the median income in India, which is a 25,000 rupee income for a family of 5 or 6, with rising costs of education and healthcare, with rising food costs. Now it's an open and shut case. What are you going to spend your money on?
Yeah.
You will withdraw your child from school and spend that money buying rice and wheat. So that's a thing that we have not taken care of. Now, most of the universities.
If the public school was good enough, then I wouldn't have that crisis.
And if the public school was available, the Sachar Committee showed
that they're not even located
the Muslim
there.
locations do not have. Take Adilabad district. You will have some fabulous residential schools set up by the government. None of them in a Muslim neighborhood. Yeah. None of them. So the Muslim girl has to travel 7 kilometers.
And sadly, I did a critique of the UPA government's performance after Sachar, because what I found was that you said minority dominated districts will get special allocations, but they didn't say you will spend that allocation in minority settlements. And I found that even those small allocations were not spent in minority settlements.
So we did a little more than that. Okay. Actually, the Prime Minister is the same Prime Minister with the same wisdom who got a bunch of us together in 2013 and said that please evaluate what happened
after Sachar. Okay.
That's called the post-Sachar Evaluation Committee, submitted to the parliament.
You were a member of
I was a member of that. Professor Kundu was chairing it. It's called the Kundu Committee. And the result was so obvious.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we said one of the obvious things was that, and it's a thumb rule, don't look at outlays, look at outcomes. You just count the if you were saying that Muslims had to be brought, count the number of Muslims who are brought, not the amount of money you have spent in so and so district, because
Yeah.
that will
Yeah. Yeah.
go to none. So that was the first thing. The second is we found that on every parameter the decline was just as bad. The rising tide had improved incomes for everybody,
Right.
but the differential had become even more. But the most heartening feature of the post-Sachar evaluation, and in all this, there is one silver lining,
Hmm.
and that is that when we did these tables on education, on labor, on wages, on employment, on rentals,
Yeah.
on credit, the strange table, the column that stood out was healthcare. The Muslim healthcare, the Muslim access to healthcare is actually better.
Hmm.
It is, the life expectancy is slightly better.
Hmm.
So, well, the explanation could be that it's a larger urban workforce, so therefore it has access to healthcare.
I
Also,
would contest that. But
हाँ, sir.
anyway.
I'm saying that the possible explanation.
Yeah.
The second is that the
I,
Muslim household does spend marginally more on healthcare than the non-Muslim. The third is that,
and women's healthcare.
and the third is, I'm coming to the women in a bit. The third is that you're more likely to find a toilet inside a Muslim household than in a similar non-Muslim household. The fourth is that the woman gets money to spend in a Muslim household. Uh, if she is earning, she has access to that money. Even if she is not earning, she has the agency to spend some money. And women traditionally have spent on healthcare more than on education.
Food and healthcare, I think.
So that's
Yeah.
why you'll find, and the food practices are such that the family eats together. The women do not eat at the end of the meal, so the girl doesn't get the crumbs, but she eats the same food, so she's marginally better off nutritionally. These advantages stay till about till she's about 15-20, then they even out, because then there is nothing,
Yeah.
then she's poor. But that was the one column that stood out.
Let me. I'll come to healthcare presently.
So,
Um, Staying with school education,
so
you know, to the class that we belong, uh, I I studied in this elite boarding school called Mayo College, and
so
we had Muslims, and it
yes,
was it was normal, natural. You wouldn't
yeah,
even notice. My daughter, uh, when she studied in Delhi in an elite school, she had a reasonable number of
yeah,
Muslim
yeah,
classmates. By the time my niece went another 10 years later, there were almost none.
yeah.
But again, this this idea that Muslims are not going into
Yes, sir.
is also a blocking out. Do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, post-COVID, the low-income schools saw the maximum dropouts,
Yeah,
because even that 50 rupees was not available
yeah,
to the. So in education, uh, that is certainly what has happened. That the Muslim population has become, from your days in Mayo
yeah,
College. It's so the more prosperous neighborhoods, the Muslim populations have
right,
moved away, so they don't have access to that neighborhood school. You see that in
yeah,
Delhi.
yeah,
And if you look at cities, I mean, the sole exception is Jaipur. We did this study on where the segregation is more than 50%, and with the exception of Jaipur, almost all other cities. It is so astonishing to see. It's not surprising that the most ghettoized city is Ahmedabad,
yeah.
but it is so astonishing to see that the most segregated city after Ahmedabad is Hyderabad,
Hyderabad. Okay,
with its
please
grand
just
tradition.
please just unpack that a
So,
little.
plot the Hyderabad Muslim population.
Mm.
Right? Hyderabad's population is something like 80 lakhs, and about 35 would be Muslim, and they are all south of the river.
Wow, yeah.
North of the river, you get one dot here and another dot there.
Bhopal, which I'm familiar with, is similar.
So,
Yeah,
and these are very progressive, historically evenly divided cities with a tradition of cosmopolitanism, of nice neighborhoods, of universities like Osmania University,
Yeah.
of the Hamidia hospitals in Bhopal, but they are now so segregated.
And we forget about Delhi, as I said, 33% Muslims who are, middle class and so
So
on.
the irony is not Delhi, sir. The
Mm.
irony is Dehradun.
Okay, why?
Dehradun had a 40% Muslim population.
Okay.
Today, they are the main plank of the government there is that no Muslim should stay.
Yeah, yeah,
That there should not be a single Muslim establishment.
yeah.
That's the Dehradun legacy.
The ethnic cleansing kind of project. Yeah.
From a city that was purely a Muslim city.
So, you know, Amir, I mean, the healthcare story
Sir,
you've already started.
sir,
Uh, you feel that that's one, uh, one segment of public services where Muslims are doing better than other communities?
so I have to be very careful in what I'm saying. The healthcare system in India is broken.
Hmm.
It is within that horrible healthcare system that you find that the Muslim indicators in the early years are better than the non-Muslim indicators. The only reason
Is it, you're saying it's cultural? I mean, I like
now,
some of the explanations you
sir,
gave
now it
of
is,
eating together is
yeah.
actually a very good example.
So eating together, drunken heads of household, uh, agency for women to spend money. These are all.
But drunken heads of household, please explain that.
So typically the lower income household, when the husband is drinking, then that's where the money is going,
Yeah, yeah.
and there is a lot of domestic abuse, and so you find lesser of that. But I must tell you, it's in early life. So till 18, the healthcare indicators are better. After that, because of poverty and marginalization and pollution and whatever, the health indicators become worse off. But for example, life expectancy at birth will be higher in a Muslim community than elsewhere, because you know the woman is treated slightly better during pregnancy. She gets to rest. She's taken care of. So the health indicators, and the biggest reason, and this is a study we did across 15 states, that while the Muslim access to primary education is very poor, the Muslim access to primary health is very high in from the state. That if you see the Muslim households in, or the Muslim population in the queues in front of hospitals, public hospitals, there will be a disproportionately high number.
Why?
The answer that is provided is that is where you do not see much discrimination. Though of late, the answer has been that you are told you produce too many babies.
Yeah. This is, I just, on the side, in the Delhi riots, one of the saddest stories is how they were treated
Yeah.
in public hospitals. I mean, they were treated so shabbily
So shabby.
and insultingly by public health officers, doctors.
So that good news is also
Is changing.
is in the past.
Yeah.
But the simple thing is that there is a greater awareness of health
The
health
importance of
seeking
health
than
seeking
is more than education,
okay.
and that shows within the Muslim community. The seeking education is not as important as in the other communities, but seeking healthcare is a
Yes.
little more so. How did that come out? Why did it happen? That's some anthropological
Yeah,
reason that I
a
have
lot
no.
of what you're saying is anthropological and fascinating, and I see that a lot of those are hypotheses which require us to
More,
understand
yes, sir, yes, sir, yes,
understand a
yes,
lot
sir.
better. Can I jump to the provision of basic public services in Muslim habitations?
Sir,
Because I find that because they're more urbanized,
yeah,
uh, even Juapara,
yeah,
which has a high middle class, I mean, it's so marked when you go into
yes, sir,
Dupara in
yes,
Ahmedabad. Just the public services suddenly declines.
disappear.
Uh, why has that happened? Is it just, you don't find drains, you don't find sewage, you don't find clean water in in uh, in Muslim? Firstly, Muslims are being forced to live in ghettos, and in those ghettos are so conspicuously deprived of basic public services compared to something just in its neighborhood.
So I'll give you a slightly different answer to this.
Yes.
Apart from the fact that there is state
A conscious,
discrimination, and so there's the cheaper areas. If you look at Hyderabad, where I can stick my neck out and tell you that that kind of discrimination
doesn't
is
exist.
marginal. If it does, it's very, very minimal.
You don't think the municipal corporation is discriminating?
Discriminates.
Okay.
I don't think.
Not here. Hyderabad is that's why the other story you were telling about Hyderabad is a place like Bhopal where I
So,
used to feel examples of our pluralism, but that's broken down.
but
And Lucknow,
but I'm pointing out to Hyderabad just to make that point,
yes.
that despite all of those advantages, what do you see in Hyderabad? Overarching Muslim population in the most horrible slums. So the urban life in India is so treacherously difficult on account of two major expenses that you wouldn't have in rural India. One is rentals, the other is transportation. Both very expensive.
So, Amir, reluctantly, I'm looking at the clock and I'm seeing that we're running out of time. There's one question that I resolve to ask every person I speak with
So,
in this, and that's where I end. Do you see hope? And if so, where? Will things get better?
So the reason I am, despite seeing things at their worst, and it couldn't get worse. I mean,
Yes.
it's really
Especially
horrible.
the last 10 years, there's been this, we were decline and then
Every day you think that it
it
can't
can't get
be as,
worse.
and
Yes.
then you get shocked tomorrow.
Yes.
Despite everything, uh, for me, hope lies in 2004. So that 99 to 2003 was pretty horrible.
Yes.
Most of the things that we see today, NRC,
Everything then.
language, all of that started then.
Yes.
Right?
The foundations were
The
laid.
foundations were laid and things were looking pretty bleak. And then one election happened. Overnight, the country was booming.
Yes.
The 10 years of bliss. It was people like me went all over the world. It was my job, but I did it with great interest and passion. I went all over the world asking people to invest in India. That India is the growing, it is a democratic sector, it is where rule of law is followed. I haven't done that after 2014. But
Your conscience won't allow you to.
and the facts don't say it.
Yeah.
I get similar optimism when I go to Bangalore. I used to go. I teach in a Bangalore university. I go there very often. 5 years, it was hopeless. The whole conversation in Bangalore, the high-tech capital of the world, was hijab. What did Tipu Sultan do? Whether the bus stop should be shaped like a tomb or a dome. That was the conversation in the newspapers, in dining halls, in academia. One election. And today people are talking about how do we get more investment in, what do we do about a new metro, how do we clean up the sun. So I think India essentially is a country of people who worry about real things. They get marginalized, they get silenced, go quiet, they get worried, they get hurt, they go to jail, and they go silent, except for a few people like you. But an election, one person at the top just changes everything. That's my hope.
Yeah, that's a lovely thought, and but still holding on to that optimism, and it's a very valuable optimism. Are our opposition to the BJP even ready to fight that election? With with clarity on ideologically, it's an ideological battle, and I think at least two things on the right of minorities to live as equal citizens with their hearts, where what Tagore had said, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. And the second is going back towards the aspiration of building a welfare state. So, are we is even anyone fighting that battle?
So here again, while it has become quite simplistic and fashionable to say that the opposition in India is dead and it's, the journalism in India is evil.
The rebellious voices with it.
So from the people I follow on various social media, people I think highly of, they've been fighting this so well in such horrible circumstances. My hats off to all the political leadership. that did not succumb. That did not succumb despite Enforcement Directorate,
Right, right.
CBI, threats, money. They have no money right now, but they've held out. Similarly with journalists, I challenge everybody that take a good, sensible Indian newspaper and even an English language newspaper and count the number of stories even today that are anti-establishment, and you will find some. You will find a Rajdeep, a Pratap, a Harsh Mander still writing, and you will find a million people following them. So there is tremendous hope.
Uh, but most of all, the last thing that you said, as I'm interpreting it, however dark things are,
So
there is resistance by ordinary, I mean, inverted commas, ordinary Indians, wherever they are, in the political field, in the media, in civil society.
sir, in
in,
UP,
in,
they gave 40 seats.
yeah, in UP.
Yes.
And in UP, in fact, and across North India, wherever Mr. Modi made the hate speeches, every one of them, they
Sir,
lost.
yes,
So the idea of India is still alive,
it is
and we will get back our country one day.
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thanks really a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Partitions of the Heart. You can find more Himal podcasts like the South Asia Review of Books and State of South Asia on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Support Himal's independent journalism by becoming a Himal patron today. We'll be back soon with another great conversation. See you then.